Well, in the association, the Phoenix Suns, they continue to dominate the league and remain number one when it comes to this week's power rankings. Should be no surprise there. Chris Paul and Devin Booker continue to roll there. Out there in the desert, riding a 7-game win streak while holding on to the top record in the association with 48 wins to show for before we get to that midseason classic. The top two spots when we look at those power rankings there, with Collin Ward-Henninger, they're the power rankings. You see him, number one. The Suns, right behind them. The Grizz have been stable, those 1-2 spots. Bulls, Heat, Mavericks. But the Bulls, by the way, they've jumped up. Thanks to DeMar DeRozan, 8 spots to number 3. Miami, not too far off when you look at the Eastern Conference, bumping up 1 to number 4. And the Mavs and Luka sitting at number 5, up 2 spots. And rounding out the top 10, you got the Nuggets there, 32 and 25, jumping in after jumping 2 spots. All right, let's get to those rankings and the man behind it here, Colin, tapping in on HQ. And let's start with the top dog here, Phoenix at number 1. No surprise to anybody, I'm sure yourself as well.
Yeah, I mean, the Suns are just absolutely smashing people, and it's so funny because you look at them, they've won 18 and 19 games. Devin Booker tweets out a screenshot of their results, and he puts an angry face emoji over the one loss. That's the type of attitude that this team has. They expect to win every single night, and why not? I mean, they absolutely have been. And when they're in the West here, just with a tremendous lead, they look over at the East, they see Miami, Chicago, Cleveland, Philadelphia, even Brooklyn, if Ben Simmons is able to contribute for them. It's an absolute bloodbath out East. Meanwhile, in the West, they're sitting pretty at 48 and 10. I mean, if we were talking about the super team Nets at 48 and 10, or the Lakers with LeBron, AD, and Russ at 48 and 10, we'd be talking about them as one of the best teams of all time, someone who's going to just run through the playoffs. So we're not talking that way about the Phoenix Suns, but we probably should be. They've been able to continue to do this even with players out, different personnel, different lineups. It has not mattered. You know, Monty Williams always talked about, you know, it's important what we do. It's much more important than what we say. And I think that's the embodiment that this team has. They go out and perform every night on the court. That's what we've been seeing. And they should absolutely be considered the title favorite right now in the NBA.
You're 4-0 this week, heading into the All-Star break there in Cleveland. Elsewhere, Luka Dončić and the Mavs cracking in the top 5. Luka's putting on the show. Your results, of course, seeing him in the top 5. Your reaction to that?
Yeah, I think if they knew Luka Dončić was going to play like this, they would have traded Kristaps Porzingis a long time ago. He seems to be a little re-energized after getting rid of his old teammate. But Luka's been phenomenal. 51, 49, 45 in 3 of his last 4 games. He's averaging 36 points for the month of February. He's only the 4th player ever to have multiple games of 45 points, 15 rebounds, and 5 assists. The last player to do that was Wilt Chamberlain. Anytime you're talking about doing something that involves scoring and your name is next to Wilt Chamberlain, you know you're doing something right. But this is what we've come to expect from Luka. It just took him a while. He came into camp a little out of shape. You know, he'll be the first one to admit that. But ever since then, he's really been starting to put on a show. This is the Luka magic that we're used to seeing. The load is going to be big on him because he doesn't have that number 2 guy anymore, if that's what you consider Kristaps Porzingis to be. But Luka is more than capable of it. And if they're sitting in that 5th or 6th seed heading into the playoffs, and you're the Memphis Grizzlies or you're the Utah Jazz, and you're sitting there looking at Luka Dončić in a 7-game playoff series, that's not something you're going to be looking forward to. So as long as Luka can continue to play at this level, which he's more than capable of, the Mavericks are going to be a dangerous playoff opponent.
Safe to say that Don is back there, back to his old self there, basically in shape, based on what we saw last year. In the East, the Celtics right behind them at 6, thanks to Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum kind of leading that way a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. And what they're doing, they're not necessarily leading with their scoring. I mean, of course they're going to score. They're just so talented. They're passing the ball. And this is really what the difference has been with the Celtics in their recent winning streak, is that they are moving the ball and playmaking for each other. They recently went into Philadelphia and destroyed the 76ers by 48 points. Afterwards, Doc Rivers, the 76ers head coach, who used to be the Celtics head coach, of course, said, this is a different Celtics team than I watched, and they used to be ISO heavy. Now they're playmaking, they're playing for each other, makes them a much more difficult team to play against. And, you know, a sneaky trade deadline addition was Derek White going to the Celtics. I know he didn't get a lot of publicity because of all the other big trades that day, but he's a connector. He's a guy who moves the ball, can knock down open threes, and of course gets after on the defensive end. The Celtics are percentage points away from being the #1 defense in the NBA now. So if they can keep that up on the defensive end, combined with their new ball movement and Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum at scoring at the level that they're capable of scoring, again, this is going to be another dangerous team in that East that is already absolutely loaded.
Looking like the contender we saw a few years ago when they went to the Eastern Conference Finals. They're back over in the West, though, of course, behind the Suns, Golden State, #2 on that side. But on the struggle bus here, you have them down to 7.
Yeah, the Warriors lost 4 or 5 games heading into the All-Star break. And, you know, I go to a lot of Warriors games, and Steve Kerr, before one of their last games, was just kind of saying, we're a little exhausted. We're looking forward to this All-Star break. The defense has slipped tremendously. They're #1 in the league still, barely ahead of the Celtics. But in that last 5 games, they are 24th in the league in defense. A lot of that is Draymond Green being out, but Kerr's the first one to admit. He said, look, we were playing well defensively in those first 10 to 12 games when Draymond was out. So that's not an excuse. That's not an excuse for getting beat at the point of attack. That's not an excuse for getting backdoor cut, not getting back in transition. So it sounds like defensively, they're just not as connected as they were. James Wiseman sounds like he's making some progress towards coming back. He could help solve some of their rim protection and rebounding issues. But ultimately, you know, the Warriors are going to come down to Steph Curry. And if he's not making shots at the level that we're used to seeing, which he hasn't been this season, you know, he's broken out of his slump a little bit, but he's still throwing up 1 for 8s, 1 for 7s. If he's not making threes at that elite level, this offense is going to struggle. And then if they're not that elite defense, they're going to have a hard time winning games. So I'm curious to see what they look like coming out of the break.
All right, we'll see how that pans out for them. As I mentioned, down to 7, 4 spots there. The Warriors still second best record in the association at 42-17. What we don't see on this page are the Lakers. They're in the second half here. The bottom tier, right above the Washington Wizards at 19. They bumped up 2, but of course, the latest injury with Anthony Davis, does that kind of hurt them? Could we see them maybe moving further down below, you know, that 19-20 range?
Yeah, the Lakers could absolutely drop it. This is really just a sad development for them. So obviously they were just playing terrible heading into the trade deadline. I was at that first game that they played after the trade deadline against the Warriors, and they almost won that game. And afterwards, the attitude from the Lakers was very optimistic, very upbeat. Hey, we're playing the right way. You know, LeBron James, Russell Westbrook both mentioned the trade deadline being passed was a weight off their shoulders. It felt like they could be freer. Westbrook was settling into his role next to LeBron and next to Anthony Davis. Then they go out and beat the Jazz. But Anthony Davis suffers that injury. He was initially, you know, it looked like a bad ankle sprain. He was supposed to be out about 2 weeks. Instead, it comes back. It's a mid-foot sprain. He's out at least a month and be reevaluated in a month, which means he'll probably be out a little bit longer. That's just a devastating blow to this team. It means absolutely more pressure on LeBron James, who at 37 years old is averaging the most points he's averaged since 2010, which is first Cleveland stint, which is just remarkable to think about what he's doing. But that's just going to add even more pressure, even more responsibility on him. As I said, Russell Westbrook seemed like he was getting into that role as the third guy. Now he's going to have to be the second guy. Ultimately, this is just a devastating blow for the Lakers, who looked like they were gaining a little bit of momentum, and now it's, you know, 1 step forward, 3 steps back.
Yeah, trying to stay in that play-in tournament there. It looks like there's trouble in Tinseltown out west for the Lakers. We'll see how that pans out. Collin Ward-Henninger, of course, breaking it all down with those rankings. Appreciate your time. Of course, no hoops tonight. We got the All-Star weekend starting. Friday, of course, tonight, Rising Stars at 9 p.m. Saturday, that's where all the money is. Skills, 3-point slam dunk at 8 p.m. And then Sunday, the Bowl on at the 71st All-Star game, tipping off at 8 p.m. Eastern there in Cleveland.
Do you want a sports network that delivers everything that matters about the game? The highlights, the picks, the instant analysis, no yelling, no fake debates, no politics. Hit the subscribe button and never miss a moment.